She endured beatings every day without fighting back, until, in front of everyone, the horse recognized her pain, and what it did next stopped everything. The sky was still dark, painted with fading stars, when Jessie Martinez's eyes opened. For a moment, she stared at the water stain on the ceiling, a map-like shape that had grown over the seasons, spreading like the troubles in her life. Outside, a rooster crowed prematurely, as if also struggling against time. 19 was too young to feel this old, she thought, swinging her legs off the sagging mattress. The wooden floor creaked beneath her bare feet, the sound familiar and somehow comforting in its consistency. At least some things remained unchanged. "Abuela?" Jessie called softly, patting down the narrow hallway of their small house. The smell of damp earth and mesquite came through the cracked window, carrying the essence of West Texas at dawn. Carmen Martinez lay in her bed, eyes closed, breathing labored. Her once strong hands now rested like fallen leaves on the patchwork quilt she'd made decades ago when she first crossed the border. Jessie touched her grandmother's forehead, warm but not feverish. A small mercy. "Buenos dias, abuela," she whispered, reaching for the pill organizer on the nightstand. "Time for your medicine." The older woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes still sharp despite her failing body. "Mija," she murmured, "I dreamed of your father last night." He was smiling. Jessie swallowed hard, the memory rising unbidden, her father's calloused hand waving as he walked toward the harvester, her mother calling something about lunch, the sudden mechanical screech, the shouting. She had been 7, watching from the edge of the field. A child's innocent curiosity turned to horror in an instant. "That's nice, abuela," was all she could manage, helping her grandmother sit up to take the pills, generic versions of expensive medications, barely keeping the pain at bay. "I made some tea with the herbs you showed me." After ensuring Carmen was comfortable, Jessie moved quickly through her morning routine. The bathroom mirror reflected a face too serious for its years, dark eyes that had seen too much, high cheekbones like her mother's, sun-darkened skin that marked her as different in a town that never let her forget it. She braided her long black hair with practiced fingers, then pulled on worn jeans and a faded blue work shirt. In the kitchen, she packed a simple lunch, bean burrito, an apple, water bottle, and glanced at the clock. 5:30. She had to be at Morgan Hills by 6. The ancient pickup truck protested when she turned the key, coughing twice before reluctantly rumbling to life. "Gracias," Jessie whispered to it, a habit her father had passed down. "Always thank the things that serve you," he'd said. The headlights cut through the lingering night as she drove down the dirt road, her thoughts running ahead to the day's work. Morgan Hills came into view after 15 minutes, a sprawling property announcing its prosperity with gleaming white fences and manicured grounds. The mansion sat on the highest point, its windows still dark, the Brooks family safely asleep while others worked their land. Jessie drove past it toward the stables, a massive structure housing some of the most expensive horseflesh in Texas. She parked beside the other workers' vehicles, all older models, most held together with hope and mechanical ingenuity. Smoothing her shirt, she took a deep breath before walking in. "You're 3 minutes late, Martinez," called a sharp voice. Taylor Brooks leaned against the stable entrance, her designer riding boots probably worth more than Jessie's truck. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, her makeup flawless. At 22, she supervised the stables primarily for her social media presence as a chic rancher, posts showing her posing with horses but never actually working with them. "Sorry, Miss Brooks," Jessie murmured, eyes downcast. "My grandmother needed—" "Spare me the telenovela," Taylor interrupted, examining her manicured nails. "The stalls won't clean themselves. Oh, and Diablo's been acting up. Deal with him first." Jessie nodded silently, heading for the equipment room. Taylor's voice followed her. "And remember, Daddy's bringing important people today. Everything has to be perfect." The stables housed 20 horses, each worth more than Jessie would earn in a decade. She moved efficiently from stall to stall, mucking out waste, replacing fresh straw, filling water troughs. Minimum wage for maximum effort. When she reached Diablo's stall, the chestnut stallion was indeed agitated, pacing and snorting, eyes rolling. Other workers gave the animal a wide berth. He had a reputation for biting. "Hey, tranquilo," Jessie whispered, standing quietly outside his stall. "¿Qué pasa, guapo?" The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. She continued speaking softly, a blend of English and Spanish that no one else could hear. "Did they forget you understand kindness, Bonito? Sometimes people only see what they expect." Gradually, Diablo's pacing slowed. He approached the stall door, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. Jessie didn't reach for him. Instead, she simply stood, allowing him to decide. After a moment, the stallion lowered his head slightly. "See? We understand each other," she murmured. "How do you do that?" Pete Johnson, the oldest stable hand, stood a few feet away, genuine curiosity in his weathered face. Jessie shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Just talking." "Well, keep it up. That horse has been raising hell all week." Pete moved on, shaking his head in wonder. By mid-morning, the stable buzzed with activity. Workers polished tack, swept aisles, and prepared for Robert Brooks's arrival. At precisely 11, a convoy of luxury vehicles rolled up the drive. Brooks emerged from a black Escalade, his tailored suit incongruous against the stable yard. A dozen people followed. Men in expensive clothes, women in impractical shoes, all wearing expressions of practiced interest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brooks announced, his voice carrying the confident tone of old money and unchallenged authority, "Morgan Hills represents the finest equestrian tradition in Texas. Our breeding program has produced champions for 3 generations." Jessie continued working, trying to become invisible as the tour group moved through the stables. She felt Taylor's eyes on her, a silent warning to stay out of sight. "And today," Brooks continued, "we're making history. You're about to witness the arrival of the newest star of Morgan Hills." The group moved outside, where a specialized horse trailer was pulling in, emblazoned with Brooks Equestrian logos. Jessie followed at a distance, curiosity overcoming caution. "This is Thunder," Brooks announced as handlers approached the trailer. "Purchased at the charity auction for $500,000. This magnificent animal will transform our rodeo program." A ripple of impressed murmurs ran through the crowd. $500,000. Jessie thought of Abuela's medications, of their leaking roof, of the college dreams she'd abandoned. The trailer door opened, and chaos erupted. A massive black stallion exploded outward, nearly trampling 2 handlers who leapt aside. 4 men struggled to control him with lead ropes as he reared and struck out with powerful hooves. "Easy now," Brooks called, maintaining his composure. "He's spirited, as champions should be." But Jessie saw beyond the performance. The horse's eyes told a different story, not spirit, but terror. And as he turned, she glimpsed his flanks, marked with scars partly hidden by his glossy coat. "This is the next big champion of Morgan Hills," Brooks proclaimed to the assembled press. 2 months of intensive training and he'll be ready for Fort Worth. The stallion's eyes rolled wildly as cameras flashed. Jessie felt a tightness in her chest, watching his fear. This wasn't a show of power. It was a cornered soul fighting for its life. Later, as twilight settled over the stables, Jessie completed her final tasks. The day's excitement had faded, most workers gone home. Thunder had been placed in the largest stall, separated from other horses. As she passed, she heard his restless movements, the thud of hooves against wood. She should leave. Abuela would be waiting. But something pulled her back toward the new arrival's stall. Peering through the gap, she saw Thunder pacing frantically, sweat darkening his coat despite the cool evening. His eyes held a wildness that spoke of something broken inside. Jessie glanced around. No one was watching. She slid down to sit on the concrete floor outside his stall, her back against the wall. "You're far from home too, aren't you?" she said softly in Spanish. The stallion continued pacing, but his ears twitched toward her voice. "I was 7 when my world ended," she continued, switching to English. "Sometimes I still smell the diesel from the harvester. Hear the screams. Thunder paused momentarily, then resumed his agitated movement. Abuela says some wounds never heal completely, but they can become bearable. From memory, she began to sing a lullaby her grandmother had taught her, an old song from the mountains of Mexico. Duérmete mi niño, duérmete mi sol. The horse stopped abruptly. His ears swiveled fully toward her, his breathing still rapid but no longer frantic. For the first time since his arrival, Thunder stood completely still, his dark eyes fixed on Jessie. She continued singing, her voice barely above a whisper, the Spanish words flowing like water over stones. She didn't try to approach him or make any sudden movements. She simply existed in his presence, offering calm in a world that had shown him only violence. After several minutes, Thunder lowered his head slightly and huffed softly, a small gesture that seemed impossible from the same animal that had threatened everyone who approached. "You're also alone, aren't you?" Jessie whispered. "I understand that. You don't have to pretend to be strong with me." The stallion moved closer to the stall door, his breathing steadier now. Jessie began another song, this one a ballad her father used to sing while working. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, the concrete cold beneath her, but gradually her own eyes grew heavy. Her last thought before drifting off was of her grandmother's words about her gift with horses. "Es el don, mija. Keep it hidden from the gringos. They always take what they don't understand." When old Pete Johnson arrived before dawn the next morning, he stopped in his tracks at the sight before him. Jessie Martinez was asleep, her back against the wall outside Thunder's stall, her face peaceful in the early light. The massive black stallion that had tried to bite everyone stood close to the bars, watching the young woman sleep, as if standing guard. Pete stared at the scene before him, his weathered face softening with something between confusion and wonder. In his 50 years working with horses, he'd seen all manner of supposed horse whisperers come and go, but nothing quite like this. The girl was barely more than a child, asleep against the wall, vulnerable and unaware. And that devil of a horse, the one that had nearly taken off his hand earlier, stood watching over her like some ancient guardian. He approached carefully, boots crunching softly on the straw-scattered concrete. Thunder's ears swiveled toward the sound, dark eyes shifting to track Pete's movement, but the stallion made no aggressive motion. He simply stood, attentive but calm, his massive body positioned between the sleeping girl and potential threat. "Miss Martinez," Pete called softly, keeping a respectful distance. "Jessie." She stirred, blinking in confusion as morning awareness returned. For a moment, panic flashed across her face. She'd fallen asleep at work, but it quickly gave way to embarrassment as she scrambled to her feet. "Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I was just—" Her words tumbled over each other as she brushed straw from her jeans. Pete raised a calming hand, then gestured toward Thunder with a slight nod. "Don't know what you did, girl, but continue doing it." He extended a steaming cup, his own coffee, bitter and strong. "Thought you might need this." Jessie accepted the cup with surprise, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "Gracias," she whispered, the Spanish slipping out before she could catch it. Old habits from home. "Brooks doesn't need to know about your night visits," Pete added, his voice low. "But that horse—" He shook his head, genuine admiration in his eyes. "Something special happening here." After Pete walked away, Jessie turned back to Thunder. The stallion remained near the front of his stall, watching her with an intensity that felt almost like recognition. She sipped the bitter coffee, studying him in the pale morning light that filtered through the high windows. "Our secret, okay?" she whispered, and the horse's ears pricked forward at her voice. Throughout the day, Jessie found herself drawn back to Thunder's stall whenever she could steal a moment. The other stable hands gave the new arrival a wide berth after word spread about his aggressive behavior during unloading. This suited Jessie fine. It gave her small pockets of privacy with him. That evening, after checking that Abuela Carmen had eaten dinner and taken her medication, Jessie sat at their small kitchen table, fingers tracing the worn wood grain as her grandmother watched her with knowing eyes. "Something has changed," Carmen observed, her Spanish soft but clear. "I see it in your face." Jessie looked up, wondering how much to share. Her grandmother had always understood her connection with animals, had even nurtured it, but had also warned her about it repeatedly. "There's a new horse at the Brooks place," she finally said. "He's different." Carmen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Different how, mija? Hurt, angry, afraid?" Jessie paused. "Like me after Mama and Papa." Her grandmother's weathered hand reached across the table to cover hers. "El don," she said simply. "The gift. It grows in you. You always told me to hide it." Carmen nodded slowly, her face grave. "And you should, especially from Los Brooks. Hide your power from the gringos, mija. They always take what they don't understand." She leaned forward, her voice dropping though they were alone. "They see a Mexican girl who cleans stables. If they see more—" She didn't need to finish. Jessie understood. In Sweetwater, Texas, being Mexican was already one strike. Being poor was another. Having something special they couldn't explain or control would be the third. And in baseball, 3 strikes meant you were out. The next morning, Jessie arrived at Morgan Hills an hour before her shift. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the air cool and sweet with morning dew. She carried her father's old guitar, its worn case held together with duct tape, the instrument itself lovingly maintained despite its age. The stables were quiet, most horses still dozing. She made her way to Thunder's stall, settling cross-legged on the concrete outside his door. The stallion was awake, watching her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations. "Buenos dias," she said softly, removing the guitar from its case. "I brought something today." Thunder's nostrils flared slightly as he caught the scents of wood, metal strings, and the lingering traces of her father's cologne that somehow still clung to the instrument after all these years. Jessie began to play softly, her fingers finding Red River Valley, one of the first songs her father had taught her. The notes floated in the morning quiet, filling the space between them. "The stars are different here than in Mexico," she told Thunder between verses. "Abuela says they're the same stars, just seen from a different place. But they feel different to me." The horse had moved closer to the stall door, his breathing steady, ears focused entirely on her. "She says you have to look at things from the right place to understand them. Maybe that's true for people too. And horses." Thunder made a soft nickering sound, almost conversational. "My grandmother says some spirits are broken, but never completely destroyed," she continued, shifting into another melody. "I think she's right." This became their ritual. Each morning before work and often after her shift ended, Jessie would spend time outside Thunder's stall. She never tried to enter his space or force interaction. Instead, she created a bubble of calm around them both, playing music, speaking softly in a blend of English and Spanish, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. Meanwhile, the training sessions ordered by Brooks proceeded with predictable disaster. The first trainer arrived with an arsenal of traditional tools, whips, spurs, and a domineering attitude that set Thunder off immediately. Jessie was assigned to assist, holding equipment while trying to make herself invisible. The trainer, a man named Harlow with a reputation for breaking difficult horses, entered Thunder's stall with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "This one just needs to learn who's boss," he declared, uncoiling a long whip. What followed was brutal to witness. Thunder fought like a creature possessed, refusing to submit. When Harlow tried to corner him, the stallion reared up, striking out with deadly hooves. Only the man's quick reflexes saved him from serious injury, though he didn't escape unscathed. As Harlow retreated from the stall, blood streaming from a gash on his arm, Jessie caught a clear view of Thunder's flanks. The scars she'd glimpsed during his arrival told a darker story than she'd initially realized. Raised ridges from chain strikes, circular burns that could only have come from cigarettes, and the telltale marks of cruel spurs dug repeatedly into sensitive flesh. "This animal's not worth what we paid," Taylor complained, watching Harlow limp toward his truck. "We should just turn him into dog food." Jessie bit her tongue until she tasted blood, forcing herself to remain expressionless as rage boiled inside her. No wonder Thunder fought so hard. He associated humans with unspeakable pain. The second trainer fared no better, ending up in the emergency room with a dislocated shoulder. Brooks grew increasingly frustrated, the investment he'd so proudly announced to the press becoming an embarrassment. Dr. Wilson, the local veterinarian, arrived to check on Thunder after the second trainer's accident. He was a third-generation rural vet whose family had served the area since before the oil boom. Unlike many professionals in town, he'd always treated Abuela Carmen with respect, seeing her as a fellow healer rather than a suspicious foreigner. "This horse has severe trauma," he observed, keeping a safe distance as he studied Thunder through the stall bars. "Physical and psychological." "Can you sedate him for training?" Brooks asked, impatience clear in his voice. Dr. Wilson shook his head. "That's not training, Mr. Brooks. That's coercion, and it won't solve the underlying issues." Later, when Brooks had left, the veterinarian noticed Jessie cleaning nearby, obviously listening while pretending not to. "You work with the horses regularly, don't you?" he asked her. Jessie nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir. I clean the stalls." "And have you noticed anything about this one? Anything unusual?" She hesitated, remembering her grandmother's warnings. But Dr. Wilson had always been kind to her family. "He's afraid," she said finally. "Not mean. Just expecting to be hurt." The doctor studied her thoughtfully. "That's an insightful observation." That afternoon, while Jessie was eating her lunch in a quiet corner of the stables, she didn't notice Taylor approaching until a shadow fell across her. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Taylor demanded, arms crossed over her designer riding jacket. Jessie looked up, confused. "Having lunch, Miss Brooks. Not that." Taylor's perfectly made-up face twisted with contempt. "Pete says you've been spending extra time with the new horse, playing guitar? Seriously?" Jessie felt her cheeks flush. This animal is worth $500,000 and is going to compete in the National Rodeo in Houston. He doesn't need some immigrant dropout to make friends with him." Taylor reached down and snatched the old guitar from beside Jessie. "This isn't a social club." "Please," Jessie said, rising quickly. "That was my father's." "Then your father can get it back when you learn your place." Taylor's voice was cold. "Clean all the stalls before you leave today. Every single one." After Taylor stalked away with the guitar, Jessie stood trembling with a mixture of anger and helplessness. Through the open stable door, she caught a glimpse of the Brooks mansion on the hill, lights blazing despite the daytime, sprinklers creating perfect rainbows on perfect lawns, while Abuela rationed their water at home. Dr. Wilson found her hours later, still mucking stalls long after her shift should have ended. "Working late?" he asked, setting down his medical bag. Jessie nodded, not trusting her voice. The doctor glanced around, then spoke more quietly. "I saw something interesting today. After you left Thunder's stall this morning, I checked on him. His cortisol levels, stress hormones, were markedly lower than yesterday. Heart rate down too." She paused in her work, looking up at him. "Never seen anything like it in 30 years of veterinary medicine," he continued. "It's like you speak the same language." "I don't do anything special," she murmured. "That's where you're wrong," Dr. Wilson replied. "What you're doing is exactly what that animal needs. Not force, not dominance. Recognition." Before leaving, he added, "By the way, I believe Miss Brooks took something that belongs to you. I might have mentioned to her father that musical therapy has documented benefits for traumatized animals. Your guitar should be returned tomorrow." That night, Jessie sat on the porch steps of their small house, looking up at the stars her grandmother had said were the same as in Mexico. The day's humiliation still stung, but Dr. Wilson's words had kindled something warm inside her. "I have a theory," Dr. Wilson had said to Pete while they watched Jessie from a distance. "Traumatized horses are like war veterans. They recognize pain in others. And that girl? She carries scars as deep as his, just invisible to the common eye. The pre-dawn light painted the sky in watercolor shades of purple and gold as Jessie Martinez made her way across the dew-soaked fields toward the Morgan Hills stables. Her heart raced with anticipation and something else, determination. After 3 months of patience, of daily visits, of gentle words and music, today would be different. Today she would take a risk that could change everything. "Today is the day, Abuela," she had whispered to her grandmother before leaving. Carmen had studied her face in the dim kitchen light, then nodded once, pressing something small and cool into Jessie's palm, a smooth stone with faint markings, worn from years of touch. "Protection," Carmen had said simply, "for both broken spirits." Now, with the stone tucked safely in her pocket, Jessie approached the imposing structure of the Morgan Hills stables. The horses were still drowsy, some nickering softly as she passed. Thunder's stall was at the far end, separated from the others. Brooks' orders after the stallion had nearly kicked through a dividing wall during the second trainer's disastrous session. Jessie paused at the entrance, listening for any signs of early arrivals. The stables were empty, the silence broken only by occasional snorts and the rustle of hay. Perfect. She moved quietly toward Thunder's stall, her footsteps light on the concrete floor. The massive black stallion was already alert, standing at the back of his enclosure, ears pricked forward at her approach. Over the past 3 months, he had gradually begun to anticipate her visits, no longer pacing frantically when she appeared. Today, his dark eyes tracked her with what Jessie had come to recognize as guarded curiosity rather than fear. "Buenos dias, Thunder," she greeted him softly, settling into her usual spot outside his stall. "I have something different planned today." From behind a nearby post, Pete Johnson watched silently, having arrived earlier than usual with similar intentions of checking on Thunder. The old stable hand had become fascinated by the quiet miracle unfolding between the Mexican girl and the traumatized horse. He held his breath now, unsure what Jessie planned, but ready to intervene if necessary. Jessie sat quietly for several minutes, allowing Thunder to adjust to her presence as always. Then slowly she rose to her feet. The stallion's ears flicked forward, tension immediately visible in his powerful frame. "It's okay," she soothed, keeping her voice low and even. "Just the same me as always." With deliberate movements, she approached the stall door. Thunder shifted nervously, moving a few steps back. Jessie stopped, waiting. When the horse settled, she took another step. This dance continued until she stood directly before the door, her hand resting lightly on the latch. "I'm going to come in now," she told him, as if he could understand every word. "Just to sit. Nothing more." Pete tensed as he watched Jessie slowly slide the bolt and open the door just wide enough to slip through. Every instinct told him to stop her. Thunder had sent 2 grown men to the hospital, men with years of experience. But something held him back, a sense that this moment needed to unfold without his interference. Inside the stall, Jessie carefully closed the door behind her, then moved to the center of the space. Thunder retreated to the farthest corner, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with uncertainty. The stallion's muscles bunched beneath his gleaming coat, ready for flight or fight. Jessie simply sat down cross-legged on the clean straw, making herself small and unthreatening. She didn't look directly at Thunder, instead gazing softly past him, her breathing deliberate and calm. "My grandmother taught me about patience when I was little," she began conversing as if continuing an earlier discussion. "La confianza es como agua en el desierto, mija. Precious and easy to spill." Thunder remained frozen in his corner, but his ears remained trained on her voice. "Trust is like desert water, precious and easily spilled," she translated, her voice melodic in the morning quiet. "She's right, you know. Once broken, it takes so long to rebuild." Slowly, Jessie began to hum the melody of Red River Valley, the song she'd played for Thunder countless mornings. The familiar tune seemed to ease some of the tension from the stallion's body. Minutes stretched into a half hour, with Jessie alternating between gentle singing and quiet stories about the stars, about her grandmother's wisdom, about the desert flowers that bloomed after rare rains. Thunder gradually began to shift his weight, taking a tentative step forward, then another. His movements were cautious, each advance followed by a pause to assess the situation. Jessie continued speaking, her tone unchanged, though her heart hammered in her chest. Pete watched in astonishment as the horse that had been deemed untrainable slowly circled the sitting girl, maintaining a careful distance but clearly curious. The stallion's behavior reminded Pete of the wild mustangs he'd observed in his youth, assessing, calculating, but not aggressive. After completing a full circle, Thunder stopped, facing Jessie from several feet away. He lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. Then, to Pete's utter disbelief, the massive stallion took 2 decisive steps forward and did something the old stable hand had never witnessed in 50 years with horses. Thunder slowly, deliberately lowered himself to his front knees, holding the position for just a moment before rising again. It wasn't a collapse or a sign of weakness, but what appeared to be a conscious gesture, almost like a bow. When the stallion rose, he extended his muzzle toward Jessie's outstretched palm. The contact was brief, just a touch of velvet nose against human skin, but the significance was enormous. Pete Johnson let his worn Stetson fall from suddenly nerveless fingers, the soft thud causing Thunder to startle slightly. "Santo Dios," he murmured, his weathered face registering shock. In 50 years in these stables. The connection established, Jessie remained in the stall for another 20 minutes, not pushing for more contact but allowing Thunder to approach and retreat as he chose. When she finally stood to leave, she did so with the same slow, deliberate movements, speaking softly the entire time. As she exited the stall, she nearly collided with Pete, who had moved from his hiding place. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "What I just saw." He shook his head, struggling for words. "That horse knelt for you, chose to touch you. In all my years, I've never seen anything like it." Jessie's face flushed. "Please don't tell Mr. Brooks. Not yet. Thunder needs more time." Pete nodded solemnly. "Your secret's safe. But girl, what you've got there, it's something special, something rare." The morning sun had fully risen by the time Jessie returned home, her steps lighter than they had been in years. Abuela Carmen was waiting on the small porch, arthritis-gnarled hands wrapped around a steaming mug of herbal tea. "It happened," Jessie said simply, unable to contain her smile. Carmen studied her granddaughter's face, her own lighting up in response. "Tell me everything, mija." As Jessie recounted the morning's events, Carmen's eyes grew misty. "Your mother had El Don too, though not as strong as yours. She could calm the meanest dog with just her presence." She reached for Jessie's hand. "But remember what I told you. Hide your power from the gringos," Jessie finished automatically. "I know, Abuela, but Dr. Wilson already suspects something, and Pete saw everything this morning." Carmen's expression grew concerned. "The veterinarian I trust, the old cowboy perhaps, but the Brooks family, they see people like us as tools, mija. Useful until broken, then discarded." The truth of her grandmother's words hung in the air between them, impossible to deny. Sweetwater, Texas might be their home now, but the invisible barriers remained firmly in place, separating those who owned the land from those who worked it. Word of Thunder's breakthrough spread quickly through the small community. Dr. Wilson, making his rounds at local farms, heard Pete's account and came to observe for himself the next morning. From a respectful distance, he watched Jessie enter Thunder's stall again, witnessing the extraordinary calm that descended over the formerly aggressive animal in her presence. "There's medical literature about animal-assisted therapy," he commented to Pete afterward. "But this is something else entirely. This is mutual healing." In town at the Mexicano market, where Carmen bought dried herbs and corn husks for tamales, people began to ask about La Chica que habla con caballos, the girl who speaks with horses. pride mingled with concern in the tight-knit Latino community. Such attention could be a double-edged sword. At a town meeting regarding water rights, always contentious in drought-prone West Texas, Dr. Wilson found himself defending Jesse's methods to skeptical ranchers. The Brooks boy brought in trainers with whips and spurs who got nowhere but the emergency room, he pointed out to the gathered crowd. Meanwhile, this young woman has accomplished more with patience and respect than force ever could. Tyler McAllister, whose family had ranched neighboring land for generations, snorted derisively. Next you'll tell us she's using Mexican magic on that beast. Not magic, Dr. Wilson replied evenly. Just a different understanding of what animals need. Sometimes the old ways are better than our modern shortcuts. The conversation shifted as the meeting moved to other topics. But seeds had been planted. Questions about whose knowledge was valued and whose dismissed. Each day, Jesse's bond with Thunder grew stronger. The stallion now greeted her with soft, nickering sounds when she approached, no longer retreating to the back of his stall. He allowed her to touch his neck and shoulders, though he still tensed if her hands moved toward his scarred flanks. 3 days after the first breakthrough, Taylor Brooks confronted Jesse as she arrived for work. "I've been hearing interesting rumors," Taylor said, her arms crossed over her riding jacket. "Apparently you think you're some kind of horse whisperer now." Jessie kept her expression neutral. "I just clean the stalls, Miss Brooks. Don't play dumb with me. My father spent good money on professional trainers for that animal, and suddenly everyone's talking about the miraculous Mexican girl." Taylor's perfectly made-up face twisted with contempt. "You think you're special? My father will love knowing you've been sneaking in here after hours." A chill ran through Jessie at the threat. Without Thunder's daily contact, without the progress they were making, the stallion would likely be declared hopeless. And valuable animals deemed dangerous rarely met good ends. Later that afternoon, Jessie noticed Robert Brooks watching her work from a distance, his expression calculating. She kept her head down, moving efficiently through her tasks, but she could feel his gaze following her movements with new interest. "I have a theory," Dr. Wilson said to Pete as they observed Jessie from across the yard, unaware of her growing audience. "Traumatized horses are like war veterans. They recognize pain in others. And that girl? She carries scars as deep as his, just invisible to the common eye." The early morning frost crunched beneath Jessie's boots as she made her way to the stables, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp Texas air. Dr. Wilson's words about trauma recognition had stayed with her through a restless night. Did Thunder truly see in her what she saw in him? A kindred spirit, damaged but not destroyed. She was so lost in thought that she nearly collided with Robert Brooks, who appeared suddenly from around the corner of the stable office. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of practiced authority that wealthy men seem to perfect. A word. Jessie's stomach tightened. "Yes, sir." Brooks gestured toward the training ring where a small crowd had gathered. "Several stable hands, Doctor." Wilson looking uncomfortable. Taylor with a triumphant smirk, and 3 men Jessie recognized as local journalists who occasionally covered Morgan Hills's more prestigious events. "I understand you've been spending considerable time with my new investment," Brooks said, studying her with cold calculation. "Show me." It wasn't a request. Jessie's eyes darted toward Thunder's stall, then back to Brooks. "Sir, We're waiting, Miss Martinez." His voice carried impatience now. "Or is this merely stable gossip?" Taylor stepped forward, arms crossed over her designer riding jacket. "She probably just fed him apples when nobody was looking. That's not real training." The gathered crowd watched expectantly. Jessie felt perspiration forming on her palms despite the morning chill. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Her connection with Thunder was fragile, private, not a spectacle for judgmental eyes. "Thunder doesn't respond well to audiences," Dr. Wilson interjected, attempting to defuse the situation. "Perhaps a more private demonstration." "This is my property, Doctor," Brooks cut him off sharply, "and I'll determine how best to evaluate its condition." The word property made Jessie flinch. That single term encapsulated everything wrong with how Brooks viewed the magnificent creature in his possession. With no choice remaining, Jesse approached Thunder's stall. The stallion was already alert, sensing the unusual energy, his ears flicking nervously as he registered the crowd of onlookers. When Jesse opened the stall door, she could see the immediate tension in his powerful body, the whites of his eyes showing as his gaze darted between her and the strangers. "It's okay," she whispered in Spanish, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Somos solo nosotros dos ahora. Ignóralos." Thunder pawed at the ground, clearly agitated by the disruption to their usual quiet routine. Jesse could feel Brooks's impatience radiating across the space between them. "We haven't got all day," he called. "If there's something to see, let's see it." Closing her eyes briefly, Jesse pushed away the pressure of the audience. She focused solely on Thunder, on his breathing, on the particular rhythm of his movements. Gradually, she felt her own tension begin to dissolve, replaced by the centered calm she'd learned to cultivate in his presence. "Remember the song from yesterday?" she murmured, beginning to hum softly, a traditional melody her father had taught her. The familiar tune seemed to catch Thunder's attention, his ears swiveling to focus on her voice. Behind her, someone cleared their throat impatiently. Jesse ignored it, continuing her gentle approach. Thunder remained wary but had stopped pawing at the ground, his dark eyes now fixed solely on her. "That's it," she encouraged, taking a slow step closer. "Just us, like always." The stallion hesitated, then lowered his head slightly. Not submission, but acknowledgement. It was a subtle gesture that most observers might miss, but to Jesse, it represented an enormous concession from an animal that had known only betrayal from humans. She extended her hand, palm up, waiting. The moment stretched, tension building as the observers watched silently. Then, with deliberate grace, Thunder stepped forward and touched his velvet nose to her fingers. A collective intake of breath came from the audience. Even Taylor's smug expression faltered. Emboldened by this small success, Jesse began moving slowly around the stall, maintaining a soft monologue as she had during their private sessions. To her relief, Thunder followed her movement, turning to keep her in his sight but no longer showing signs of panic. "Walk toward the gate," Brooks instructed suddenly. Jesse complied, heart pounding. This wasn't part of their established routine, and she feared Thunder might perceive it as abandonment. But to her surprise and relief, the stallion followed her, maintaining the invisible connection between them. As she opened the gate to the adjacent training ring, Thunder hesitated only briefly before following her into the open space. The morning sun cast his black coat in gleaming relief, highlighting the powerful muscles beneath. For perhaps the first time since his arrival at Morgan Hills, the stallion looked truly magnificent rather than merely dangerous. Jesse continued her quiet communication, alternating between English and Spanish, maintaining eye contact when Thunder sought it. She moved in a loose figure-8 pattern, and the stallion matched her, creating a harmonious dance of mutual awareness. Dr. Wilson watched with undisguised fascination. The journalists had pulled out cameras, documenting the unexpected display. Even Pete had stopped his morning chores to observe, his weathered face reflecting pride. "Can you ride him?" Brooks asked abruptly. Jesse faltered mid-step. We haven't gotten that far yet." "You've had 3 months," Brooks countered, impatience evident. "Thunder has been traumatized, sir," Jesse replied, finding unexpected courage. "He needs time to build trust." "Time is money, Miss Martinez, and that animal represents a significant investment." Jesse looked at Thunder, who had stopped when she did, watching her with intelligent eyes. They had progressed further than she dared hope, but riding him now, with an audience, with the pressure of Brooks's expectations, it risked everything they'd built. Yet refusing outright would likely end her access to Thunder completely. She made a quick decision. "I'll need a rope," she said quietly. Pete immediately retrieved a length of soft cotton rope. Jesse fashioned it into a simple loop, not a bridle or anything that might trigger Thunder's memories of harsh bits or tight nosebands. As she approached him with it, the stallion tensed visibly. "Es solo una guía, amigo," she murmured. Just a guide, not a chain. With infinite patience, she showed Thunder the rope, letting him smell it, touch it with his nose. When he didn't retreat, she gently slipped it around his powerful neck, leaving it loose and comfortable. The next moments would define everything. Jessie placed her hand on Thunder's withers, feeling the warmth of his coat, the slight tremor of muscles beneath. She applied the gentlest pressure, a suggestion rather than a demand. "May I?" she asked him, as if he could understand every word. Thunder stood perfectly still, neither accepting nor rejecting. Jessie waited, respecting his silence as an answer in itself. Then, almost imperceptibly, the stallion lowered his back slightly, a subtle invitation. With one fluid movement, Jessie pulled herself onto Thunder's bare back. A gasp arose from the observers, mounting without saddle or bridle a horse that had sent 2 professional trainers to the hospital. For one breathless moment, horse and rider remained motionless, adjusting to this new reality. Then Jessie leaned forward slightly, whispering words meant only for Thunder's ears. And the stallion began to move, a slow, deliberate walk around the perimeter of the ring. The cameras clicked rapidly now, capturing the improbable scene. Jessie kept her posture relaxed, her hands resting lightly on the rope around Thunder's neck, using minimal guidance. The stallion responded to the subtle shifts of her weight, turning when she leaned, stopping when she sat back. After one complete circuit, Jessie gently directed Thunder back to the center of the ring, then slid from his back with the same fluid grace. She stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his neck, their connection unbroken. The silence that followed seemed to stretch indefinitely, broken finally by Dr. Wilson's quiet words. "Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable." Brooks approached, his expression unreadable, calculating eyes moving from Jessie to Thunder and back again. The stallion tensed at his approach, but didn't retreat. "In my office," Brooks said curtly to Jessie. "Now." The wood-paneled office spoke of old money and power, leather-bound books that were never read, hunting trophies from animals that had no chance, photographs with politicians whose policies hurt communities like Jessie's. She stood uncomfortably before the massive desk while Brooks settled into his leather chair. "How much do you want?" he asked without preamble, his cold eyes calculating her value. Jessie blinked in confusion. "Sir?" "For whatever technique you're using with that horse, name your price." The implication struck her like a physical blow, that her connection with Thunder could be purchased, packaged, and replicated like some training gimmick. "I'm not selling anything, Mr. Brooks," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "Thunder isn't a machine that needs fixing. He's a being that needs time to heal his wounds." Brooks leaned forward, irritation flashing across his features. "Don't be naive, girl. Everyone has a price." He opened a drawer, withdrew a document, and slid it across the desk. 5 times your current salary. Health coverage for your grandmother. A position as special trainer rather than stable hand. Jessie stared at the contract, her mind racing. The health coverage alone was tempting beyond words. Abuela Carmen needed medications they could barely afford, treatments they'd been putting off for years. I need time to think," she managed. "Take the day," Brooks replied magnanimously. "But understand this. I've invested heavily in that animal. He will compete in Fort Worth, with or without your methods." Walking home that evening, Jessie's thoughts swirled in conflict. The contract in her bag felt simultaneously like salvation and betrayal. The promised health care for Abuela would be life-changing, but the accelerated timeline for Thunder's training would push him before he was emotionally ready. The local newspaper had already been delivered when she arrived home, and her heart sank at the headline. "The Black Enchanter of Morgan Hills and His Mexican Secret." Below it, a photo of her on Thunder's back, looking like something from another world. Carmen was waiting at the kitchen table, the paper spread before her, her expression grave. "Mija," she said softly, "what have you done?" Jessie sank into the chair opposite her grandmother, the weight of the day suddenly overwhelming. "I didn't have a choice, Abuela." Brooks forced a demonstration. "And now everyone knows." Carmen's weathered finger tapped the newspaper photo. I warned you about showing your gift to the gringos. There's more. Jesse pulled out the contract. Brooks offered me a real position, 5 times the money. Healthcare for you. Carmen's eyes widened briefly before narrowing with suspicion. What does he want in exchange? To prepare Thunder for the Fort Worth Rodeo, to make him a champion. Ah, the older woman nodded knowingly. He wishes to turn healing into profit. But your medicine, the treatments Dr. Seguin recommended. Carmen reached across the table to take Jesse's hand. My health is not worth another's suffering, mija, not even an animal's. That night, Jessie lay awake long after her grandmother had fallen asleep, the moonlight casting shadows across her small bedroom. The contract on her nightstand represented everything their struggling family needed, yet came with a cost she wasn't sure she could pay. While Jessie walked to work the next morning, the town was already buzzing with the story. Copies of the newspaper circulated from hand to hand, her photograph drawing curious stares from people who had previously looked through her as if she were invisible. "Show me," ordered Robert Brooks on a cold winter Texas morning, crossing his arms while dozens of people, including local journalists invited by him, watched Jessie walk hesitantly toward Thunder's stall. Now it was time for the truth. As Jessie left Robert Brooks' office with the contract clutched in her hand, she felt the weight of eyes following her across the stable yard. News traveled faster than dust storms in West Texas, and by morning, everyone in Sweetwater would know about the girl who spoke to horses. The evening shadows stretched long across Morgan Hills as she walked to her truck, the distant silhouette of the Brooks mansion looming against the darkening sky like an oversized tombstone marking the grave of simpler times. The following dawn brought exactly what she had feared. A small cluster of curious onlookers had gathered at the Morgan Hills gates when she arrived for work. They quieted as she passed, their whispers resuming behind her back like the rustle of dry grass in winter wind. "That's her, the Mexican girl from the paper. They say she uses old Indian magic on that killer horse. My cousin works at the feed store and said she sings to it in Spanish." Jessie kept her eyes forward, clutching the strap of her worn backpack like a lifeline. The stables, usually her sanctuary, now felt exposed and vulnerable. Inside, more unfamiliar faces awaited. A photographer checking his camera equipment, a woman in a pressed blouse holding a notebook, and Robert Brooks himself, unusually present this early. "Ah, Miss Martinez," Brooks called, his voice carrying the forced joviality of a man performing for an audience. "Our woman of the hour." He beckoned her over with a manicured hand, placing it heavily on her shoulder for the benefit of the watching journalist. "Jessie here is the face of Morgan Hill's innovative approach to horse training. A true success story, from stable hand to special trainer in just a few months." The photographer's camera clicked rapidly, capturing her discomfort for posterity. The woman with the notebook stepped forward, extending her hand. "Regina Wilkes, Sweetwater Gazette. We'd love to do a feature on your, Mexican horse whispering techniques." "I don't whisper," Jessie said quietly. "I just listen." Brooks laughed too loudly. "Modesty. Refreshing in today's world, isn't it? Now, I believe you have a session scheduled with Thunder this morning. Don't let us interrupt your process." His eyes carried a clear message. Perform. The contract remained unsigned in her backpack, but Brooks was already leveraging her connection with Thunder for publicity. With the small entourage following at what Brooks deemed a respectful distance, Jessie approached Thunder's stall. The stallion was agitated, sensing the unusual energy, his powerful body moving restlessly in the confined space. When he caught sight of her, he froze momentarily, nostrils flaring as he assessed whether she represented safety or threat in this new context. "I'm sorry," she whispered in Spanish, letting the familiar sounds flow between them. "This isn't what I wanted either." For the next hour, Jessie went through a carefully abbreviated version of her usual routine with Thunder, acutely aware of the cameras documenting every movement, of Brooks' impatient shifting whenever progress seemed too subtle or slow for public consumption. Thunder cooperated minimally, his trust visibly strained by the intrusion. When the session ended, Brooks appeared satisfied, while Jesse felt only hollow uncertainty. "You'll be relocated to the trainer's quarters effective immediately," Brooks informed her afterward. "It's closer to the stables and more befitting your new position. But my grandmother can manage one night. Tomorrow we'll arrange transportation for her to visit the medical specialists in Abilene, as promised in the contract." The trainer's quarters proved to be a small but comfortable apartment above the stable office, clean, modern, and isolated from the bunkhouse where the other workers stayed. Jessie stood in the unfamiliar space after Brooks left, the silence pressing against her eardrums. This too was a kind of separation from the other Mexican workers, from the community that had sustained her family, an elevation that doubled as quarantine. That night, alone in the strange bed, Jessie called her grandmother. "Es una jaula dorada, abuela," she said softly. "A golden cage." "Be careful, mija," Carmen responded, her voice thin across the connection. "Remember the story of the coyote who was invited to dinner by the rancher." Jessie smiled despite herself. He was honored until he realized he was the meal, not the guest. Exactly. The next morning brought more disruptions to the fragile routine Jessie had established with Thunder. A film crew arrived to document the miracle of Thunder for a regional agricultural program. Brooks strode through the stables like a general inspecting troops, issuing orders about camera angles and lighting. Taylor followed in his wake, her face a mask of barely contained fury. Before the filming could begin, Jessie discovered her grooming kit missing. The special brushes she'd been slowly introducing to Thunder's routine, building positive associations with human touch. She searched frantically, aware that Brooks was growing impatient with the delay. "Looking for these?" Taylor appeared behind her, empty-handed but smirking. Such a shame when equipment gets misplaced, almost like someone doesn't want you to succeed. Jessie met her gaze steadily. "Why does it bother you so much that your father values my work?" "Work?" Taylor laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "This isn't about work. It's about a social experiment, the exotic Mexican horse charmer. You're this season's novelty, nothing more." Before Jessie could respond, Pete appeared, holding her missing brushes. "Found these in the feed room," he said casually, but his eyes flicked meaningfully toward Taylor. Funny place for grooming tools. Later that afternoon, Pete confronted Taylor near the tack room, his weathered face uncharacteristically stern. "The inveja is a poison that kills first who carries it, menina," he said, intentionally using Portuguese from his mother's Brazilian heritage. "Jealousy poisons the vessel that holds it before spilling onto others." Taylor's face flushed with anger. "You're as replaceable as she is, old man. Remember that." Despite the sabotage attempts, Thunder's sessions continued showing gradual improvement. Dr. Wilson documented each interaction meticulously, creating a record of progress that even Brooks couldn't dismiss. After a particularly successful morning where Thunder allowed Jessie to touch his previously untouchable scarred flanks, the veterinarian delivered unexpected news. "I've received the results from your grandmother's specialist," he told Jessie privately. "The treatment plan is working. Her blood pressure is down, and the new medication is controlling her diabetes better than the generic version." Tears sprang to Jessie's eyes. "Really? Really?" He smiled kindly. "Sometimes compromise yields unexpected blessings, Jessie." That evening, as sunset painted the hills in shades of amber and gold, Jessie sat alone in Thunder's stall, the stallion standing nearby, his presence comfortable and undemanding. For the first time since the public scrutiny began, she allowed herself to weep quietly, the emotional toll of the past days finally breaking through. "Am I doing the right thing, Thunder?" she whispered between soft sobs. "Abuela's getting better, but at what cost to you? To us?" The stallion moved closer, his breath warm against her hair, offering the silent companionship that had become their shared language. In that moment, Jessie realized that regardless of Brooks's exploitation, regardless of Taylor's sabotage, the connection between her and Thunder remained authentic, perhaps the only genuine thing in the artificial world of Morgan Hills. 2 weeks into her new position, word spread through the Mexican community about Jesse's apparent success. At Sunday service at San Miguel Church, elderly women who had known her since childhood touched her arm as she passed, murmuring blessings and congratulations. Young men who had worked the same fields and ranches nodded respectfully, pride mingled with wariness in these interactions. Pride in one of their own advancing, wariness about the inevitable cost of such advancement. After Mass, Father Domingo pulled her aside. "The community is watching your journey with hope, Jessica," he said quietly, "but also concern. The Brooks family has a history with our people that goes beyond employment." "What do you mean, Father?" The priest hesitated. "Ask your grandmother about the water rights dispute of 1987, about the families who were deported after they spoke up." As her third week at Morgan Hills under the new arrangement began, Jessie arrived to find Brooks surrounded by investors in expensive suits, all of them smoking cigars despite the no smoking signs posted throughout the stables for the animals' safety. "Ah, here she is," Brooks announced. "Gentlemen, this is the trainer I was telling you about. She's preparing Thunder for his debut at the Fort Worth Rodeo." One of the men raised an eyebrow. "The Mexican girl? Interesting choice, Brooks." "Results are what matter in business," Brooks replied smoothly. "And speaking of results, I've taken the liberty of registering Thunder for the Fort Worth competition. 3 weeks from today." Jessie felt the blood drain from her face. 3 weeks? But you promised he wouldn't be forced to compete until he was ready." Brooks smiled thinly. "And I determine when he's ready, Miss Martinez. The contract you signed gives me that authority." That night, Jessie visited her grandmother, bringing groceries and the promised medications. Carmen looked better than she had in years, her eyes clearer, her movements less pained. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "They want Thunder to compete in 3 weeks, Jessie confessed as they sat at the small kitchen table. "He's not ready, Abuela. The crowds, the noise, the pressure, it could undo everything we've built." Carmen studied her granddaughter's face. "And what will happen if you refuse?" "I don't know. The contract gives Brooks the final say. And your treatments." The older woman reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Jessie's. "Mi vida no vale más que tu alma, mija. My life isn't worth more than your soul." On her return to Morgan Hills, Jessie found Dr. Wilson waiting outside the trainer's quarters, his expression troubled. "I need to show you something," he said, leading her to his truck. Inside, he pulled out a medical file. "These are the prescriptions for your grandmother. Look at the manufacturer." Jessie examined the paperwork, confusion giving way to anger as she realized what she was seeing. The medications weren't the advanced formulations Brooks had promised, but cheaper generics with different labels, the same ones she had struggled to afford before, just in fancier packaging. "He lied," she whispered. "He cut corners," Dr. Wilson corrected grimly. "Like he always does. I'm sorry, Jessie. I should have checked sooner." The next morning, Jessie confronted Brooks in his office, the fraudulent prescriptions clutched in her hand. "You promised quality health care for my grandmother." Brooks barely glanced up from his computer. "And she's receiving care, isn't she? The specifics weren't outlined in the contract you signed. This isn't right, right?" He finally looked at her, amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "This is business, Miss Martinez. And speaking of business, Thunder will begin intensive training for Fort Worth tomorrow. I've scheduled sessions with noise desensitization, starting with recorded crowd sounds at moderate volume." "That's too fast," Jessie protested. "He needs gradual exposure, not sudden immersion." Brooks leaned back in his chair, studying her with cold calculation. "You promised me a champion, Miss Martinez. I'm merely holding you to that promise, unless, of course, you'd prefer to return to mucking stalls. Though I hear immigration and customs enforcement has been particularly active in Sweetwater lately. How long has your grandmother been in this country without documentation? 30 years? The threat hung in the air between them, clear and venomous. Jessie stood frozen, the realization of her powerlessness washing over her like ice water. You promised that he wouldn't be forced to compete until he was ready, Jesse confronted Brooks, who responded with a cold smile. And I determine when he's ready, Miss Martinez, unless you prefer to see your grandmother back to backyard curanderismo. The sound of Brooks' threat lingered in the air like a rattlesnake's warning. Jessie stood motionless, her fingers still clutching the fraudulent prescription papers, their edges now damp from her perspiring palms. She knew what this meant. Her grandmother's well-being had become a weapon to be wielded against her conscience. We begin tomorrow at 9, Brooks continued, his voice returning to its businesslike tone as if he hadn't just threatened her family. The rodeo circuit expects Thunder to perform, and Morgan Hills delivers on its promises. Yes, sir, Jessie managed, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. The following morning dawned with an oppressive heat unusual for early spring. Jessie arrived at the training ring to find a sophisticated sound system being installed by technicians, while Brooks supervised impatiently. We'll start with recorded crowd noise at 50% volume, he explained when she approached. Then increase gradually until he's acclimated to full rodeo levels. Thunder was already in the adjacent holding pen, his dark eyes tracking the unfamiliar equipment with visible suspicion. When he caught sight of Jessie, his ears pricked forward momentarily before flattening again at the sound of a speaker being tested. He's not ready for this, Jessie said quietly. We should begin with much lower volume, maybe even just recorded conversations. Brooks waved her concern away. The Fort Worth Rodeo doesn't offer quiet spaces for sensitive animals, Miss Martinez. He'll adapt or he won't compete. It's that simple. Jessie approached Thunder slowly, her movements deliberately calm despite her internal turmoil. Hey, handsome, she murmured, allowing him to catch her scent. Rough morning ahead, I'm afraid. The stallion's nostrils flared slightly, his powerful body tense but not yet panicked. She could read the trust in his posture, a trust she feared was about to be betrayed. When the recordings began, Thunder flinched visibly. The sounds of hundreds of people cheering, boots stomping on bleachers, and announcer's voice booming filled the training ring. Despite Brooks calling it 50%, the volume was overwhelming even to Jessie. Thunder's reaction was immediate and severe. He began circling frantically, his eyes showing white, sweat quickly darkening his gleaming coat. When Jessie tried to approach, he reared slightly, not attacking but clearly establishing a boundary born of fear. See how he responds to pressure, Brooks called over the noise. This is necessary. For 30 excruciating minutes, Jessie attempted to calm Thunder using every technique they'd developed together. Soft Spanish phrases, gentle songs, respectful distance. Nothing penetrated the wall of fear the noise had erected. By the time Brooks finally signaled for the sound to be lowered, Thunder was trembling, his magnificent body drenched in sweat. Tomorrow we'll try 60%, Brooks announced, checking his expensive watch. I have meetings in Midland for the rest of the day. Continue working with him. After everyone had left, Jessie sat cross-legged outside Thunder's stall, giving him space to recover. The stallion had retreated to the farthest corner, his trust visibly shaken. She didn't attempt to enter or even speak at first, simply offering her presence without demands. I'm sorry, she finally whispered after nearly an hour of silence. I wouldn't have chosen this for you. Thunder's ears flicked toward her voice, but he maintained his distance. The setback was heartbreaking after months of careful progress. That evening, Dr. Wilson arrived to check Thunder's physical condition. His heart rate is still elevated, he noted with concern, observing the stallion from outside the stall. And he's showing signs of digestive distress. Brooks wants to increase the volume tomorrow, Jessie said, her voice hollow with defeat. The veterinarian frowned. That would be medically inadvisable. This animal is showing classic signs of re-traumatization. He hesitated, then added more quietly, I've been examining your grandmother's prescriptions more thoroughly. The medications she's receiving aren't just generics. They're outdated formulations with potentially serious side effects. Jessie's head snapped up. What? The diabetes medication particularly concerns me. It's been largely replaced by newer versions because of kidney complications in some patients. Dr. Wilson's face was grave. Brooks didn't just cut corners. He may have put her health at risk. That night, Jessie visited her grandmother, bringing the correct medications that Dr. Wilson had discreetly provided from his own supplies. Carmen looked tired, dark circles beneath her eyes that hadn't been there the week before. "The medicine makes my heart race, mija," she confessed as Jessie helped her into bed. "And my vision blurs sometimes." "Dr. Wilson gave me different pills," Jessie explained, showing her the new medication. "He says these are better." Carmen studied her granddaughter's face in the dim lamplight. "Something else troubles you." Jessie couldn't hold back the tears any longer. "They're pushing Thunder too hard, too fast. Today was—" She struggled to find the words. It was like watching someone tear down a house that took months to build, brick by brick. "The Brooks family has always valued things only for what they can take from them," Carmen said softly. "Land, animals, people, all the same to them." The following days established a grueling pattern. Each morning brought increased noise levels that sent Thunder spiraling into panic. Each afternoon, Jessie would sit quietly with him, trying to rebuild what had been shattered. Each night, the stallion seemed to retreat further into himself, the light in his intelligent eyes dimming. By the end of the week, Brooks's impatience had reached new heights. "The competition is 2 weeks away," he reminded Jessie harshly. "And that animal still acts like he's never heard a crowd before." "Because crowds mean pain in his experience," Jessie tried to explain. "His previous owner would parade him before audiences, then beat him when they weren't watching. We're reinforcing those associations." Brooks dismissed her concerns with a wave. "Apply whatever methods you need, but make progress. Real progress." The next morning, Taylor appeared at the training session, her presence unusual and immediately concerning. She watched from the fence with undisguised satisfaction as Thunder grew increasingly agitated by the blaring crowd recordings. During the lunch break, while Jessie was briefly called away by Pete to discuss feeding schedules, Taylor seized her opportunity. Jessie returned to find Thunder saddled, the equipment having been placed on him during her brief absence. "He needs to get used to performance gear," Taylor explained innocently, though her eyes gleamed with malice. Jessie approached Thunder cautiously. The stallion was standing unnaturally still, his breathing shallow. As she drew closer, she noticed a slight tremor running through his powerful frame. "Something's wrong," she murmured, running her hand gently along his flank. When she reached beneath the saddle, her fingers encountered a small, sharp object, a metal burr that had been deliberately placed to dig into Thunder's skin with every movement. "What is this?" Jessie demanded, holding up the cruel object, her voice shaking with rage. Taylor's expression remained neutral. "Must have fallen in from the tack room. These old saddles are full of loose parts." Before Jessie could respond, Thunder suddenly reared in pain, the prolonged pressure having become unbearable. She narrowly avoided his striking hooves, falling backward onto the dirt as the massive stallion impinged in agony. For a terrifying moment, Thunder seemed poised to trample her. But instead, he leapt sideways, crashing through the fence rail and galloping toward the outer pasture. It took 3 hours to coax Thunder back to the stables. By then, his dark coat was streaked with sweat and dirt, and a small trickle of blood had dried where the metal burr had cut into his back. Jessie's own hands were scraped raw from climbing through barbed wire fencing during the search. Dr. Wilson arrived as twilight descended, his face grim as he examined the wound. "This was no accident," he said quietly, applying antiseptic to the cut. "This was deliberately placed to cause maximum discomfort without being immediately visible." Jessie nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. "Taylor, I found this embedded in the padding," the veterinarian added, holding up a small triangular piece of metal with wickedly sharp edges. "Someone shaped this specifically to hurt him." That evening, after ensuring Thunder was resting as comfortably as possible, Dr. Wilson confronted Brooks in his office. Jessie waited outside, her stomach knotted with anxiety as raised voices filtered through the closed door. "This constitutes animal cruelty," she heard Dr. Wilson assert firmly. "That object was placed deliberately to cause pain. That's a serious accusation, Doctor. Brooks' voice replied coolly. Do you have proof of who placed it? I have evidence of a pattern of mistreatment. First, the fraudulent medications for Carmen Martinez. Now this. The Texas Veterinary Medical Board would be very interested. I have 3 friends on that board. Brooks interrupted, his tone suddenly menacing. How long do you think you'd keep your license if I made a few calls about prescription irregularities? I notice you've been dispensing medications rather freely lately. Silence followed, heavy and charged. When Dr. Wilson emerged, his face was ashen, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. He threatened your license? Jessie asked softly as they walked toward the parking area. He tried, the veterinarian replied. But I've kept meticulous records for 30 years. He doesn't scare me. He paused, glancing back at the imposing mansion. What does concern me is what he might do next. Brooks is desperate for Thunder to perform at Fort Worth. When desperate men with power feel cornered, they become dangerous. Later that night, Jessie slipped into the stables, needing to check on Thunder one final time. The stallion was awake, standing alert in his stall, ears pricked forward at her approach. Despite everything, he still moved toward her, his trust damaged but not destroyed. I'm so sorry, she whispered, gently applying the herbal salve Carmen had prepared for his wound. You didn't deserve any of this. Thunder lowered his great head, huffing softly against her shoulder in what felt remarkably like forgiveness. Jessie leaned her forehead against his powerful neck, drawing strength from his resilience. The following morning, Dr. Wilson arrived early, carrying a small medical bag filled with the correct medications for Carmen. These should counteract any side effects from the inferior drugs, he explained, pressing the package into Jessie's hands. I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. The timing of that sabotage seems particularly calculated. What do you mean? Brooks is under tremendous financial pressure to make Thunder a success. Taylor wouldn't risk damaging such a valuable animal unless she had her father's tacit approval, or unless she knows something we don't about his plans for Thunder. As if summoned by their conversation, Pete approached, his weathered face troubled. You both need to see this, he said, extending a folded document. Found it when I was cleaning Brooks' office last night. Jessie unfolded the paper, a sales contract written in Spanish. As she read, her blood turned to ice. He's planning to sell Thunder after Fort Worth? To Arena Diablo in Mexico. Dr. Wilson took the document, scanning it quickly. This buyer is notorious. His animals don't last long in his possession. That's not all, Pete added grimly. This isn't just about money anymore. Something bigger's happening. Brooks is nearly bankrupt. Bet everything on an oil well that came up dry. Fort Worth is his last chance to attract new investors. This isn't just about you and the horse anymore, warned Dr. Wilson while handing Jessie the correct medicines for her grandmother. Brooks is willing to harm anyone who stands in his way, and I think I know why he's so desperate for Thunder to be a champion at any cost. Dr. Wilson's face grew solemn as he spread several newspaper clippings across the stable office desk. The yellowish paper crackled beneath his fingers, headlines from the Midland Reporter-Telegram stark against the morning light filtering through dusty windows. I've been collecting these for weeks, he explained, pointing to the largest headline. Brooks Petroleum faces bankruptcy after failed venture. Robert Brooks bet everything on a promising geological survey in the Permian Basin. The well came up dry 3 months ago, right before he bought Thunder. Jessie leaned closer, scanning the articles with growing unease. So the horse is what? His last investment? His last hope, Dr. Wilson corrected. Brooks needs to attract new investors desperately. A champion horse at Fort Worth would rebuild his image as someone with the Midas touch. It's not about the prize money, it's about perception. Pete nodded grimly, placing the sales document next to the clippings. And once Thunder serves that purpose, he'll be shipped across the border to this Arena Diablo place. Jessie's fingers traced the Spanish contract, her throat tightening. I know this name, Alejandro Vega. He runs what they call extreme rodeos in Coahuila. The animals don't last long. Most die within months, Dr. Wilson confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The practices are brutal, even by the standards of traditional rodeo." The weight of this revelation settled over them like a physical presence. Thunder wasn't just being prepared for a single competition. He was being set up for a death sentence after serving his purpose. "I have to show you something else," Pete said quietly, pulling out his phone. "My nephew works for a security company that installed cameras at the Arena Diablo last year. He sent me this. Said he couldn't sleep after seeing what happened there." The video showed a cavernous arena filled with cheering spectators. In the center, a black horse, remarkably similar to Thunder, bucked wildly as a rider with spurs dug mercilessly into its flanks. Blood streaked the animal's sides, yet the crowd roared its approval. Jesse turned away, unable to watch further. "This is what Brooks has planned for him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "After everything Thunder's survived." "We need to get that horse away from Brooks," Pete stated flatly. "Legal or not." Dr. Wilson raised a cautioning hand. "That's theft, Pete, and a $500,000 theft at that. We need to work within the system." "What system?" Pete's weathered face flushed with anger. "The system where men like Brooks always win, where animals and people like us are just collateral damage?" Jessie found herself torn between the two perspectives, Pete's revolutionary fury and Dr. Wilson's cautious legalism. She thought of Thunder, of his intelligent eyes that had begun to trust again, of the small victories they'd achieved together. The idea of him ending up in that Mexican arena made her physically ill. "There has to be a way," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. Later that day, as Jessie worked with Thunder in the training ring, this time without the torturous sound system, she noticed a silver sedan parked discreetly at the edge of the property. Through the fence, she could make out a woman in professional attire taking notes as she observed the session. When Jessie mentioned it to Pete afterward, his expression grew concerned. "Journalist, maybe. Brooks doesn't allow press without his approval." By evening, the mystery was solved when Jessie returned to her quarters to find a business card slipped under her door. Sofia Ramirez, investigative reporter, San Antonio Express News. Scrawled on the back was a phone number and a message. "Story on working conditions at Morgan Hills. Call me. Sources protected." Jessie stared at the card, her mind racing. A reporter investigating Brooks could be a powerful ally, or a dangerous complication. If Brooks discovered she'd spoken to the press, her grandmother's precarious situation would immediately be at risk. After a restless night, Jessie awoke to an unexpected commotion. Outside her window, she could see Robert Brooks addressing all the stable workers, his face set in hard lines. Taylor stood slightly behind him, arms crossed with satisfaction. "It has come to my attention," Brooks announced as Jessie joined the group, "that someone has been speaking to the media about internal matters at Morgan Hills." His cold gaze swept across the assembled workers. "Let me be absolutely clear. Anyone found communicating with reporters will be terminated immediately. No exceptions." Several workers shifted uncomfortably, eyes downcast. Many were undocumented, their families dependent on the meager wages Brooks paid. For them, termination meant more than losing a job. It meant potential deportation. "Mr. Brooks," Jessie found herself speaking before she'd fully formed the thought. "Is there something specific the press is asking about?" His gaze locked onto her, arctic and calculating. "Curious question, Miss Martinez. Perhaps you already know the answer?" The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Wilson's truck. Brooks dismissed the workers with a final warning glance, then strode toward the main house with Taylor in tow. "He's scared," Dr. Wilson observed quietly as he joined Jessie. "A reporter from San Antonio has been asking questions about labor practices, visa violations, and unpaid overtime." "She left me her card," Jessie admitted. "I haven't called." "Perhaps you should," the veterinarian suggested, checking that no one was within earshot. "But from a secure phone, not your cell." That afternoon, Jessie faced a crucial decision. Thunder's training session had been particularly difficult, with Brooks demanding she use a harsh bit that the stallion clearly associated with past trauma. When she'd refused, Brooks had threatened to bring in another trainer who, wouldn't be so sentimental about a commercial asset. After ensuring Thunder was comfortable in his stall, Jessie drove to the public library in Sweetwater, where she could use a phone that couldn't be traced back to her. With shaking fingers, she dialed the number on Sofia Ramirez's card. "This is about Morgan Hills," she said when the reporter answered. "About Robert Brooks." For 40 minutes, Jessie detailed everything: the exploitation of workers, the fraudulent medications, the plans for Thunder, the financial desperation behind Brooks's cruelty. Sofia listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing Jessie's story to unfold. "This is exactly what I've been investigating," the reporter confirmed. "But I need documentation. Proof. Dr. Wilson has records of the medication fraud," Jessie offered. "And Pete Johnson found a contract for Thunder's sale to Arena Diablo. Could you get copies?" Sofia asked. "Without putting yourself at risk?" "I'll try," Jessie promised, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "But there's something else you should know. Brooks is threatening workers with deportation if they talk. Many have families, children in local schools." "I understand." Sofia's voice softened with genuine concern. "My own parents were undocumented for years in the Rio Grande Valley. I know the fear. We'll protect their identities." That evening, as Jessie returned to Morgan Hills, she found her grandmother waiting in her quarters. An unexpected and worrying surprise. "Abuela, what are you doing here?" Carmen's face was grave. "Father Domingo drove me. There's something you need to know, mija, about the Brooks family history with our people." They sat at the small table as Carmen recounted a story Jessie had never heard. How, 30 years earlier, when Robert Brooks's father still ran the ranch, a group of Mexican workers had organized to protest dangerous working conditions after a man died in a preventable accident. 2 days after they spoke to a lawyer, Carmen said, her voice hollow with old grief. Immigration arrived. 23 families torn apart. Children left behind when parents were deported. My cousin's husband was among them. He died trying to cross back to reach his children. Jessie sat in stunned silence, connecting this history to Brooks' current threats. "History repeating itself," she murmured. "Be careful, mija," Carmen warned, clasping Jessie's hands. "The Brooks family has always known how to silence those who challenge them." The next day brought unexpected allies. Dr. Wilson arrived with Marco Delgado, an attorney who specialized in immigrant rights cases. "He takes cases pro bono for workers facing retaliation," Dr. Wilson explained during a private moment in the medical treatment room. Marco shook Jessie's hand firmly. "What you're doing is brave," he said simply. "And you're not alone." The lawyer explained that a network of advocates had been monitoring Brooks's operations for years, gathering evidence of labor violations, wage theft, and intimidation tactics. Jessie's information about Thunder and the connection to Brooks' financial troubles provided the missing piece they needed. "We're organizing a meeting at San Miguel Church tonight," Marco explained. "Workers from all the ranches in the area, community leaders, legal advocates. Will you come?" The church basement was packed when Jessie arrived that evening. Familiar faces from the Mexican community mingled with Anglo ranchers she recognized as Brooks' business rivals. Father Domingo moved through the crowd, facilitating introductions, building bridges between groups that rarely interacted as equals in Sweetwater. "The situation at Morgan Hills isn't isolated," Marco addressed the gathering. "It's part of a pattern across West Texas. But together, we have power Brooks doesn't expect." As the meeting progressed, Jessie was surprised to see several Anglo ranchers offer support, promises of jobs for workers who might face retaliation, statements they would provide to the press about Brooks' unethical business practices. One elderly rancher, Henry McDonald, whose family had competed with the Brooks clan for generations, spoke with particular conviction. "Some of us remember how the first Robert Brooks built his empire, stealing land, exploiting workers, corrupting officials," McDonald declared. "It's time for Sweetwater to heal from that legacy." Unknown to the group, Taylor Brooks had followed Jessie to the church. Through a cracked basement window, she observed enough of the meeting to send her racing back to her father with news of the gathering. By the time Jesse returned to Morgan Hills, Brooks had dispatched security personnel to intimidate workers leaving the church. From her window, she watched as men in dark uniforms photographed license plates and individuals, a clear message that Brooks knew who had attended. In her stall, Thunder sensed the escalating tension. The stallion moved restlessly, his ears flicking at every unusual sound, his powerful body coiled with nervous energy. When Jesse entered to check on him, he approached immediately, nudging her shoulder as if offering comfort rather than seeking it. "We're both in trouble now, aren't we?" she whispered, stroking his velvet nose. "But we're not alone anymore." As if in response, Thunder lowered his great head to rest against her chest, his warm breath synchronizing with her own. In that moment, Jesse felt a resolve crystallize within her. Whatever came next, she would protect this animal who had survived so much already. Later that night, her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, her blood turned to ice. The message contained only a photograph. Thunder, as he had been before rescue, nearly dead after a brutal training session, his body broken and bloody. Below the image was a single line: "This is his future at Arena Diablo." Jesse stared at the horrific image on her phone screen, her hands trembling so violently that she nearly dropped the device. The photo showed Thunder splayed on muddied ground, his coat matted with blood, one eye swollen shut, rope burns visible across his heaving flanks. His eyes, or the one that remained open, held such anguish that Jesse had to look away, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't just a threat. It was a promise of what awaited him if Brooks succeeded. She deleted the message immediately, but the image remained seared into her mind as she paced her small quarters. Sleep proved impossible that night, her thoughts alternating between rage and paralyzing fear. By dawn, Jesse had made her decision. Whatever the personal cost, Thunder would not face that fate. The morning arrived shrouded in mist, the Texas spring humidity settling heavily over Morgan Hills. Jesse moved through her routine mechanically, hyper-aware of the increased security personnel Brooks had stationed around the property. Men in dark uniforms with radio earpieces patrolled the perimeter, their presence a silent warning to anyone considering defiance. As Jesse approached Thunder's stall, she found him unusually alert, his ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring at the scent of strangers on the property. The stallion's sensitivity to changing atmospheres had always amazed her. He registered shifts in human energy that others missed entirely. "Something's coming," she whispered to him in Spanish, running her palm gently along his powerful neck. "But I won't let them hurt you again." The stables buzzed with nervous energy as workers moved cautiously through their tasks, conversations hushed, eyes downcast. Brooks had created an atmosphere of surveillance that effectively silenced any whispers of resistance. Even Pete kept his distance, though his gaze met Jesse's briefly across the tack room, conveying wordless support. By mid-morning, the unexpected arrived in the form of a media convoy rolling through the main gates. 3 news vans, their satellite dishes extending skyward, parked in formation before the main stable complex. Jesse watched from Thunder's stall as Robert Brooks emerged from his office, his face a careful mask of genial welcome despite the obvious surprise in his eyes. "Mr. Brooks," called a familiar voice. Sofia Ramirez from the San Antonio Express News led the group of reporters, microphone in hand, camera crew trailing behind her. "We'd like your comment on allegations regarding labor practices at Morgan Hills, specifically concerning your undocumented workers and reports of intimidation." Brooks maintained his composure, though Jesse could see the tightening around his eyes. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed, Ms. Ramirez. Morgan Hills maintains the highest standards for all our employees. Now, if you'll excuse me." "We also have questions about Thunder," Sofia continued, undeterred. "The stallion you purchased for $500,000. Sources tell us you plan to sell him to Arena Diablo in Mexico after the Fort Worth Rodeo, a venue known for fatal animal abuse." A flash of genuine alarm crossed Brooks's face before he regained control. "Preposterous. Thunder is the future of our breeding program. Taylor appeared at her father's side, her expression shifting from confusion to fury as she recognized the reporter. Her eyes scanned the stables until they locked onto Jesse, who had stepped out to witness the confrontation. In that moment of silent accusation, something fundamental shifted between them. The interview continued, Brooks deflecting questions with practiced ease while gradually maneuvering the media contingent away from the stables and toward the main house, where he promised a proper tour and refreshments, a transparent attempt to control the narrative. Taylor, however, remained behind, her posture rigid with barely contained rage. Jesse returned to Thunder's stall, her heart pounding. The stallion sensed her anxiety, moving close to the gate, his presence oddly protective. For several minutes, she stood with her forehead pressed against his warm neck, drawing strength from his solid presence. The confrontation, when it came, was more explosive than Jesse had anticipated. Taylor burst into the stable corridor, her designer boots striking the concrete with military precision, face flushed with anger. "You," she hissed, advancing on Jesse. "You spoke to that reporter. You're trying to destroy everything my family has built." Jesse stepped away from Thunder's stall, unwilling to let the confrontation happen near the sensitive animal. "Your father is destroying it himself," she replied evenly. "By exploiting workers, by planning to sell Thunder to people who will torture him to death." "Torture?" Taylor laughed bitterly. "It's business. That horse is property, our property. You're nothing but a stable hand who got above herself." Several workers had paused their tasks, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Taylor noticed their attention and seemed to draw energy from it, her voice rising. "You think these people care about you? That reporter? The so-called community? They're using you." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You'll be deported and forgotten before nightfall." Without warning, Taylor shoved Jesse hard, sending her stumbling backward against the stable wall. The physical attack was so unexpected that Jesse had no time to brace herself, her head striking the wooden planks with enough force to momentarily disorient her. From Thunder's stall came a sound Jesse had never heard before, a piercing, enraged shriek that raised goosebumps on every person within earshot. The massive black stallion reared up, striking the stall door with his front hooves with such force that the heavy wood splintered. What happened next unfolded with dreamlike clarity. Thunder, in a display of power that defied expectation, gathered himself and leapt over his damaged stall door, clearing the nearly 6-foot barrier with room to spare. Workers scattered in panic as nearly 1,000 pounds of agitated stallion landed in the corridor with earthquake force. Taylor froze, her face draining of color as Thunder oriented himself between her and the fallen Jesse. The stallion did not charge or strike out. Instead, he positioned his massive body as a living barrier, his ears pinned flat against his skull, teeth bared in silent warning. Time suspended as human and horse faced each other in perfect stillness. Taylor's expression transformed from shock to genuine fear as she realized her position. Thunder maintained his protective stance, allowing no movement toward Jesse, who remained on the ground behind him. "Call him off," Taylor whispered, her voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. "He's not attacking you," Jesse replied softly, slowly rising to her feet. "He's protecting me." The cameras appeared so suddenly that Jesse hadn't noticed the journalists returning to the stables, drawn by the commotion. Multiple lenses captured the extraordinary tableau. The privileged daughter of wealth trembling before a horse defending a fallen Mexican stable hand. The symbolism was unmistakable and irresistible to the media present. "Don't move suddenly," Jesse cautioned Taylor, who seemed on the verge of panic. With gentle words in Spanish, she placed her hand on Thunder's flank, feeling the tremors of adrenaline coursing through his powerful frame. "I've got you," she murmured to him. "You're safe." Gradually, the stallion's breathing steadied, though he maintained his position between the two women. Jesse continued speaking softly, moving her hand in small circles on his shoulder, until he finally allowed her to step around to his head. "That's enough now," she told him, looking directly into his intelligent eyes. "I'm okay." With surprising gentleness, Thunder lowered his head to nudge Jesse's shoulder, as if checking her condition. The The cameras continued recording every moment of this unexpected communion. Taylor retreated slowly, her composure shattered. As she backed away, Robert Brooks pushed through the gathered crowd, his face contorted with fury that froze into disbelief at the scene before him. "Get that animal back in its stall," he ordered, his voice strained. "I don't think that's possible right now," Dr. Wilson replied, having arrived amidst the commotion. Any attempt to separate them forcefully could result in injury. Instead, Jesse gently guided Thunder toward the exterior door leading to the training ring. The stallion followed willingly, his body language relaxed now that the perceived threat had been neutralized. Together, they walked into the sunlight, leaving stunned silence in their wake. Outside, away from the chaotic energy of the confrontation, Thunder transformed back into the sensitive, responsive animal Jesse had come to know. He followed her movements with attention rather than fear, his earlier protective rage nowhere evident. The news crews had repositioned themselves around the training ring perimeter, capturing footage that would soon circulate well beyond West Texas. Sofia Ramirez stood slightly apart from her colleagues, her expression reflecting understanding of the story's deeper dimensions. "This is extraordinary," she said quietly when Jesse approached the fence. "I've never seen anything like it." "He's protecting what protected him," Jesse replied simply. For the next hour, with cameras rolling continuously, Jesse and Thunder demonstrated their connection. Without commands or restraints, the stallion matched her movements, stopped when she stopped, turned when she turned. Their silent communication had an almost choreographed quality that belied the months of patient trust building behind it. Pete Johnson joined Dr. Wilson at the fence, shaking his head in wonder. "Never saw anything like that in all my years," he murmured. "The way he jumped that stall door, and then to stand guard over her like that." "Trauma creates bonds we don't fully understand," the veterinarian replied. "Those two recognize something in each other that goes beyond our conventional explanations." By late afternoon, the video of Thunder's protective intervention had gone viral on social media with the hashtag #BarkThunderProtector. Local television stations interrupted regular programming to show the footage of the massive black stallion standing guard over the fallen young woman. Commentators speculated about the backstory, the relationship between human and horse, the apparent confrontation that had triggered the event. More significantly, the viral moment created space for the deeper story Sofia had been investigating. Her initial report on labor conditions at Morgan Hills gained traction alongside the dramatic footage, creating a perfect storm of negative publicity for Robert Brooks. As darkness fell, Jesse sat cross-legged in the training ring, Thunder grazing peacefully nearby. The day's events had shifted something fundamental in their relationship. The stallion had become not just recipient of her protection but provider of it as well, a mutual guardianship that transcended conventional human-animal dynamics. Dr. Wilson approached cautiously, respecting the quiet bubble surrounding them. "Brooks is on the phone with his lawyers," he informed her softly. "The video has reached over 1 million views already. People are asking questions about everything: Morgan Hills, Thunder's background, your methods." "Is that good or bad?" Jesse asked, watching Thunder's relaxed movements in the fading light. "Both," the veterinarian admitted. "Brooks is cornered, and cornered men make desperate choices. I'm concerned about what he might do next." As if confirming these fears, Pete approached hurriedly from the direction of the main house. "Something's happening," he warned. "Brooks just got off the phone and immediately called a transport company. I heard him say they need to move a horse tonight, away from media attention." While the video of Thunder protecting Jesse spread like wildfire on social media with the hashtag #AngryThunderProtector, Brooks made a desperate phone call. "We need to remove that animal tonight. Bring the trailer at 2 a.m., when everyone's asleep, and bring your armed men too." Brooks's desperate phone call hung in the night air like a death sentence. Pete's warning had sent a chill through Jesse's body that had nothing to do with the cool evening breeze sweeping across the Texas plains. 2 in the morning, armed men, a trailer. The pieces assembled in her mind with terrifying clarity. "They're going to take him tonight," she whispered, her eyes meeting Dr. Wilson's, "before anyone can stop them." The veterinarian nodded grimly. Brooks knows the media attention has changed everything. If he's going to sell Thunder to Arena Diablo, it has to be now, before authorities start asking questions. Darkness had fully descended over Morgan Hills, the vast property illuminated only by security lights that cast long shadows across the grounds. In Thunder's temporary enclosure, the stallion grazed peacefully, unaware of the forces mobilizing against him. Watching him, Jessie felt a surge of protective fury, unlike anything she'd experienced before. "We need to call the sheriff," Dr. Wilson suggested, already pulling out his phone. Pete shook his head. "Sheriff Dawson has been in Brooks's pocket for 20 years. He'll just say it's a property dispute and that Brooks has every right to move his own horse. Then we need to warn people," Jessie insisted. "The reporters, the advocates from the church meeting." "There's no time," Pete interrupted. "Brooks made that call less than 10 minutes ago. He'll have men watching the main road, monitoring phone calls. We're on our own." The realization settled over them like a shroud. Whatever they decided to do, they would have to do it without outside help, at least initially. Jessie looked back at Thunder, remembering the photo of his brutalized body, the promise of what awaited him across the border. The stallion lifted his head suddenly, as if sensing her gaze. His ears pricked forward attentively. "I'm going to stay with him," she declared, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "All night if necessary." Dr. Wilson frowned. "That's dangerous, Jessie. If Brooks is bringing armed men..." "Then I'll be a witness," she cut in. "They can move property, but they can't assault a person without consequences, even in Texas." The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Pete had returned to his quarters but promised to stay alert, positioning himself where he could monitor the main access road. Dr. Wilson reluctantly departed after extracting a promise from Jessie that she would call at the first sign of trouble. He would park his truck just beyond the property line, ready to return at a moment's notice. Alone with Thunder in the quiet stable, Jessie fought to keep her anxiety from transferring to the sensitive animal. She spoke softly to him, recounting stories from her childhood, singing old Mexican lullabies her grandmother had taught her. The stallion remained unusually alert, his ears constantly moving, tracking sounds beyond human perception. "You know something's coming, don't you?" she murmured, stroking his powerful neck. "You've been through this before. Midnight loadings, strange men, uncertainty." Thunder nickered softly in response, lowering his great head to gently nudge her shoulder. The gesture of trust nearly broke her heart. Shortly after 1:30 in the morning, Jessie's phone vibrated with a text from Pete. "Trailer approaching back road, 4 men in truck, moving to position." Her mouth went dry. She extinguished the small lantern she'd been using, plunging the stable into darkness broken only by slivers of moonlight through the high windows. Thunder shifted restlessly, sensing the change in atmosphere. "Shh," she soothed, her voice barely audible. "We need to be very quiet now." The minutes ticked by in tense silence. Then came the sound of engines, the crunch of gravel under heavy tires. Headlights swept across the stable walls as vehicles positioned themselves outside. Men's voices, terse and professional, carried through the night air. Jessie retreated deeper into Thunder's stall, one hand resting reassuringly on his flank. The stable doors swung open with a protesting creak. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping methodically across the interior space. Thunder's muscles bunched beneath Jessie's palm, but he remained surprisingly still, as if understanding the need for stealth. "This one," came Robert Brooks's unmistakable voice, directing the flashlight beams toward Thunder's enclosure. "Load him quickly and quietly. The transport papers are already prepared." Jessie's heart hammered against her ribs as the men approached. She could make out their silhouettes now. 4 strangers in addition to Brooks, their movements suggesting professional animal handlers rather than stable hands. "Mr. Brooks," she called out, stepping forward into the beam of a flashlight. "What's happening?" The sudden appearance startled the men, one of them cursing under his breath. Brooks recovered quickly, his voice cold with controlled anger. "Miss Martinez, this is unexpected and unwelcome. You should be in your quarters at this hour." "I was concerned about Thunder," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. He seemed agitated earlier. Brooks gestured impatiently to his men. "Continue preparations. Miss Martinez was just leaving." One of the men approached Thunder's enclosure with a lead rope and halter. The stallion immediately backed away, ears pinned flat against his skull, nostrils flaring in distress. "He's upset," Jesse observed, stating the obvious. "Where are you taking him in the middle of the night?" "That's none of your concern," Brooks snapped. "Your employment status is becoming increasingly precarious, Miss Martinez." The handler attempting to approach Thunder was having no success. The stallion circled his enclosure, evading every attempt to corner him. His breathing had become labored, his movements increasingly frantic. Jesse recognized the signs of escalating panic. "He won't load for you," she stated flatly. "Not like this." "Then we'll make him," one of the men responded, pulling what looked like a cattle prod from his belt. "No." Jesse moved between the man and Thunder's enclosure. "You'll injure him or yourselves. He's already traumatized." Brooks stepped forward, his patience clearly exhausted. "This animal is my property. I paid $500,000 for him. You are interfering with my right to transport my property as I see fit." "This animal is not just property," Jesse countered, her voice trembling but firm. "He's a living being who has suffered more than any of you can imagine, and I won't let that continue." The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Thunder had positioned himself directly behind Jesse, his massive head visible over her shoulder, as if understanding she was his defender. The men looked to Brooks for direction, clearly uncomfortable with the unexpected resistance. "He belongs to me," Brooks stated coldly. "I own him. You have nothing but that ramshackle house where you live with your illegal grandmother." The cruel words hung in the air between them. Thunder sensed the hostility, his breathing accelerating further. 4 men with a trailer waited to take him to a future of pain and eventual death. Only Jesse stood in their way, her small frame insignificant against their collective force. The impasse was broken by the sudden appearance of headlights sweeping across the stable yard. Multiple vehicles approached rapidly, their tires throwing gravel. Doors slammed, voices called out. Brooks turned in alarm as Dr. Wilson strode through the stable doors, the local sheriff behind him, along with several other figures emerging from the darkness. "Robert," Dr. Wilson's voice carried the weight of official authority. "The court has some questions about your plans for this animal." Sheriff Johnson, not Dawson, who Pete had warned was in Brooks' pocket, but Johnson from the neighboring county, stepped forward, his weathered face impassive as he assessed the scene. "Mr. Brooks," he said formally, "I have a temporary restraining order preventing the removal of the stallion known as Thunder pending a hearing tomorrow morning." Brooks' face contorted with rage. "This is my property. You have no right." "Actually, we do," interrupted a woman stepping into the light, Marco Delgado's legal partner, Patricia Reyes. "Animal welfare laws in Texas may be limited, but they do exist. We have documentation of this animal's previous abuse and expert testimony regarding his current rehabilitation needs." As if to emphasize her point, more people entered the stable. Pete, several community members from the church meeting, and most surprisingly, Henry McDonald, Brooks's wealthy ranching rival. "The hearing is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow at the county courthouse," Sheriff Johnson continued, unperturbed by Brooks's evident fury. "Judge Evans wants to see this animal and Miss Martinez personally." "This is ridiculous," Brooks sputtered. "A midnight ambush over a horse." "Not just a horse," Dr. Wilson corrected quietly. "And not just about Thunder. The court is also interested in reviewing labor practices at Morgan Hills, particularly regarding undocumented workers and threats of deportation as retaliatory measures." The transport men looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly wanting no part in what had evolved from a simple midnight loading to a complex legal confrontation. One by one, they backed away toward the door. "We'll see you in court, Mr. Brooks," Sheriff Johnson concluded. "In the meantime, this animal stays exactly where he is, under Miss Martinez's care." The defeated exit of Brooks and his men left the stable in momentary silence. Thunder's breathing gradually steadied as the hostile presence retreated. Jessie leaned against his enclosure, suddenly exhausted as adrenaline drained from her system. "How did you know?" she asked Dr. Wilson. "Pete texted me about the trailer," he explained. "I'd already contacted Judge Evans earlier today after seeing that viral video. She's had concerns about Brooks for years, but never had enough evidence to act. She issued the emergency order within minutes." Henry McDonald stepped forward, his weathered face creased with a mix of concern and determination. "Brooks has been operating above the law in this county for too long," he stated. "Maybe it's time folks remembered there are consequences, even for men like him." As the group dispersed to prepare for the morning's hearing, Jessie remained with Thunder, her hand resting lightly on his powerful neck. The stallion had calmed completely, his large eyes half closed with relief now that the threat had passed. "We're not finished yet," she whispered to him, "but you're safe tonight." Sheriff Johnson, who had lingered behind the others, approached cautiously. "Miss Martinez, the judge wants to see this animal and you tomorrow at 9 a.m. to determine what's best for both of you. I suggest you get some rest. Tomorrow won't be easy." Morning dawned crisp and clear over Sweetwater County, the sun cresting the eastern hills to cast long shadows across the courthouse square. By 8:30, an unexpected crowd had gathered, ranch hands in their cleanest shirts, Mexican families with children in school clothes, reporters with cameras poised. The courthouse steps, usually empty on weekday mornings, teemed with spectators drawn by the viral video and rumors of the midnight confrontation. Jessie stood apart from the gathering, her attention focused on the horse trailer where Thunder waited. Dr. Wilson had modified the trailer with special padding and a lowered center divider, allowing the stallion more visibility and movement. Still, Thunder's anxiety was palpable. His coat darkened with sweat despite the morning chill, his breathing rapid and shallow. "I know," Jessie murmured in Spanish, standing at the trailer's side window where Thunder could see her. "Strange places are hard, but I'm right here." Through the slats, Thunder's dark eye fixed on her, the white rim visible in his lingering fear. Yet he didn't panic or strike at the trailer walls, progress that would have seemed impossible months ago. Robert Brooks arrived in a gleaming black SUV, flanked by 3 men in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases. Taylor followed in a separate vehicle, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses despite the early hour. As they approached the courthouse, the crowd parted silently, their collective gaze a tangible weight of judgment. At precisely 9 o'clock, a court officer emerged to address the assembly. "Judge Evans has decided to conduct this hearing outdoors, given the unusual circumstances," he announced. "The court will convene in the south parking area in 15 minutes. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Outdoor hearings were virtually unheard of in the Texas judicial system. "What does this mean?" Jessie asked Dr. Wilson, her stomach tight with anxiety. "It means," he replied with a hint of satisfaction, "that Sarah Evans hasn't changed a bit since law school. She's always believed in seeing things with her own eyes." The south parking lot had been transformed. Barricades created a makeshift courtroom perimeter, with a table and chair positioned under a simple canopy for the judge. Within this space, areas were designated for the opposing parties, Brooks and his attorneys on one side, Jessie and her supporters on the other. At 9:15 precisely, Judge Sarah Evans emerged from the courthouse. In her 70s, with silver hair cropped short and practical leather boots beneath her judicial robes, she carried herself with the no-nonsense authority of someone who had spent 50 years in a system that initially hadn't wanted her. "This is an unusual hearing," she began without preamble, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed parking lot. "But these are unusual circumstances. I've reviewed the emergency petition filed by Dr. Wilson regarding the stallion known as Thunder, as well as Mr. Brooks's counterclaim asserting his property rights." She surveyed the assembled crowd with sharp eyes. "Let me be clear. This court recognizes Mr. Brooks's legal ownership of the animal in question. However, Texas law also recognizes that animals, while property, are a special category requiring certain protections." Brooks's lead attorney rose immediately. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of property rights. My client paid $500,000 for this animal and has documentation of legal purchase and transfer. Indeed, Judge Evans acknowledged. And I've reviewed those documents. I've also reviewed the evidence of this animal's previous abuse and the documentation of its rehabilitation under Miss Martinez's care. She turned toward Jesse. I understand the animal is present? Yes, Your Honor, Jesse replied, her voice steadier than she felt. In the trailer, as requested. Judge Evans nodded. I'd like to see this connection that everyone's talking about. Can the animal be safely released into that temporary corral? The makeshift corral had been assembled that morning, strong enough to contain a horse, but far smaller than an actual training ring. Jesse glanced at it with concern. He might be frightened, Your Honor. The space is confined and there are many strangers. Understood. Proceed with caution and we'll maintain distance. With Dr. Wilson's assistance, Jesse carefully opened the trailer. Thunder stood trembling inside, his eyes wide as he registered the unfamiliar surroundings and crowd. For a heart-stopping moment, Jesse feared he might bolt or panic. Estoy aquí, she murmured, keeping her voice low and steady. I'm here, just like always. The stallion's ears flicked toward her voice, his attention focusing despite his fear. With agonizing slowness, he stepped down the ramp, his powerful body coiled with tension. Once on solid ground, he pressed close to Jesse's side, using her as a buffer between himself and the watching crowd. Together, they entered the small corral. Thunder circled the perimeter once, assessing potential threats before returning to stand near Jesse. His behavior was nothing short of miraculous given his history. Nervous but controlled, trustful despite overwhelming reasons for fear. Miss Martinez, Judge Evans called. Would you demonstrate the connection you've established with this animal? With a deep breath, Jesse began. She spoke softly to Thunder in a mix of English and Spanish, using no commands, simply conversing as she would with a friend. Gradually, his tense posture relaxed. She moved a few steps away. He followed without hesitation. She turned. He turned. When she extended her hand, he lowered his head to touch her palm with his muzzle. The crowd watched in hushed amazement as horse and young woman moved together in a dance of mutual understanding. Without halter or lead rope, Thunder responded to the subtlest cues, a shift in Jesse's weight, a soft word, even her gaze direction. After several minutes, Judge Evans raised her hand. Thank you, Miss Martinez. That's quite illuminating. She turned to Brooks. Mr. Brooks, could you approach the corral? Brooks strode forward confidently. The moment he neared the fence, Thunder's demeanor changed dramatically. Head raised, nostrils flared, body tensed for flight. The stallion retreated to the farthest corner, watching Brooks with unconcealed fear and hostility. Interesting, the judge observed. Dr. Wilson, in your professional opinion, what are we witnessing? The veterinarian stepped forward. A clear trauma response, Your Honor. This animal associates certain types of humans, particularly authoritative men, with pain and fear. With Miss Martinez, he displays trust that would be impossible without a profound therapeutic connection. Judge Evans nodded thoughtfully. I've seen enough of the demonstration. Let's proceed with testimony. For the next hour, the makeshift courtroom heard evidence from both sides. Brooks's attorneys emphasized legal ownership, investment value, and the right to use property for business purposes. Dr. Wilson presented medical records documenting Thunder's previous injuries and psychological trauma, alongside scientific literature on rehabilitation techniques for abused animals. Henry McDonald testified about witnessing similar cases of animal exploitation at rodeos, while Marco Delgado connected the case to broader issues of ethical treatment of both animals and workers. When Jesse's turn came, she spoke simply and directly. Thunder isn't just an investment or a trophy, she said, meeting Judge Evans's eyes. He's survived unimaginable cruelty and still found the courage to trust again. What Mr. Brooks plans, selling him to Arena Diablo for extreme rodeos, would destroy him completely. And what alternative do you propose? Judge Evans asked. A rehabilitation program, Jesse replied, for Thunder and other traumatized horses. A place where they can recover and help others recover too. Children from the foster system, veterans with PTSD, healing together. A lovely sentiment, Brooks's attorney interjected. But who would fund such an endeavor? My client has invested considerably in this animal. Henry MacDonald rose from his seat. I would, Your Honor. I have 200 acres of unused pasture that would be perfect for such a program. I'm prepared to donate the land and initial funding. A murmur ran through the crowd. MacDonald, despite his wealth, was respected in Sweetwater for his fair treatment of workers and ethical ranching practices. Judge Evans called for silence. I've heard sufficient testimony. Before rendering my decision, I'd like to speak privately with my colleagues. She gestured to two other judges who had been observing from the sidelines. As they conferred, Jesse returned to Thunder in the corral. The stallion had calmed considerably, though he remained vigilant. When she leaned against the fence, he rested his head over her shoulder in a gesture that brought tears to her eyes. Whatever happens, she whispered, you changed me forever. After 15 minutes, Judge Evans returned to her seat, her expression solemn. In 50 years on the magistrate, she began, I've learned that justice isn't always found in legal precedent. Sometimes it stands before our eyes, if we have wisdom enough to see it. She straightened her papers before continuing. This court recognizes Mr. Brooks's legal ownership of the stallion Thunder. However, given the documented evidence of prior abuse, current rehabilitation progress, and concerns about future welfare, this court orders the following arrangement. The stallion will remain under the care of Miss Martinez in a specialized rehabilitation program to be established on land donated by Mr. MacDonald. Mr. Brooks will retain technical ownership, but cannot remove the animal from this program without court approval. Additionally, the stallion cannot be used for commercial rodeo purposes during rehabilitation. Brooks half rose from his seat, face flushed with anger, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm. This court further orders an investigation into labor practices at Morgan Hills Ranch, particularly regarding immigration status threats as retaliatory measures against workers. Judge Evans fixed Brooks with a steely gaze. This case is adjourned. The crowd erupted in cheers as the judge departed. Jessie stood motionless by the corral, the magnitude of the victory washing over her in waves. Thunder nudged her gently, as if sharing in her stunned relief. 6 months later, the Healing Spirits Ranch celebrated its grand opening. The modest property featured renovated stables, a small office, and paddocks where 7 rescued horses now lived. A simple sign at the entrance depicted a silhouette of Thunder with a young girl beside him. Jessie, now attending veterinary courses at Texas Tech on a special scholarship, divided her time between studies and the ranch. The viral video had brought unexpected support, donations, volunteers, and most importantly, people and animals in need of healing. On this particular golden autumn afternoon, Abuela Carmen sat in a rocking chair on the porch of their new cabin, watching as Jessie led a group therapy session. 3 veterans with PTSD and 2 children from the foster care system worked quietly with the horses, their faces reflecting the same peaceful concentration that the animals showed. Thunder, now the undisputed leader of the small herd, moved with newfound confidence among the humans. The scars on his body remained, but the fear in his eyes had given way to calm awareness. Mira, Carmen said to the young woman from the local newspaper, who had come to write a follow-up story. Some wounds are invisible to the common eye, but when 2 broken spirits meet, they can heal each other in ways that medicine cannot explain. As the session ended and the participants departed, Jessie approached Thunder with a simple rope halter. The stallion lowered his head willingly, and together they walked toward the open pasture that stretched to the horizon. At the gate, Jessie removed the halter entirely. With a soft word, she swung onto Thunder's bare back. They moved as one across the Texas landscape, no saddle, no bridle, only mutual trust guiding their path. 2 souls once marginalized, now free and strong, proving that the most powerful language needs no words, only hearts willing to recognize each other's pain and the transformative power of mutual respect.